Oh, everybody, welcome. We are at the Libertarian Party National Convention in Washington, D.C. Literally behind us is the main convention hall. It's been particularly interesting already. We have a great show tonight, and instead of wasting any time with any big stories or anything, the big story is here today as the Libertarians are figuring out who's going to be the candidate, and we have RFK Jr. as well as Donald Trump who have attended and spoken to this crowd. So we're going to be having a conversation on the current state of the election, politics, and policies. Before we get started, head over to castbrew.com, pick up Cast Brew Coffee to support the show. Appalachian Nights is everybody's favorite. And head over to timcast.com, click Join Us to become a member and support our work directly. Joining us tonight, of course, is presidential candidate RFK Jr.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Everybody knows. Absolutely. I really do appreciate it. Everybody knows who you are, so we're really excited that you're here so we can discuss, I think, a lot about the Libertarian Party, your speech, what you're hoping to accomplish, as well as I've got a million questions about your policies and your plan for 2024. So I appreciate you being here. We have Luke, Phil, and Hannah Claire. You guys want to just quickly...
Yeah, very ironically, YouTube actually deleted my video today where I actually featured a clip from you on Joe Scarborough. So very ironically, good to have you here. Thank you so much, Tim, for taking the risk for having this conversation. This is a very important conversation. Check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/wearechange. We just had Dave Smith on today. Probably we're going to have Ron Paul on Sunday, and we're doing a big nature hike this Sunday for members of LukeUnfiltered.com. Phil, how are you?
How you doing? I am Phil Abonte. I am the lead singer of the heavy metal band All That Remains. I'm an anti-communist and a counter-revolutionary. How you doing there, Hannah Claire?
I'm excited. I think it's a good Friday show. I'm Hannah Claire Bremmel. I'm a writer for scnr.com. That's Scanner News. I'm so grateful to be a part of this. Let's get to it.
Right on. My first question just has to do with us being at the Libertarian Party National Convention, and I know that you spoke. I'm curious. Wow, the LP is getting a lot of attention right now, and I'm wondering what compelled you to come down here and speak to the people here. What are you thinking?
Well, I've always had an affinity for libertarians. My approach to the environment was always a free market approach. You know, I started working for commercial fishermen on the Hudson River in a blue-collar community on the Hudson River, and I worked most of my career has been working for commercial and recreational fishermen who were capitalists, free marketeers. And I understood pollution to be a subsidy and an assault on the market. So that was always my approach. I've talked about it for 40 years, and about about a lot of I'm anti-war, which is one of the key sympathies of libertarians. I believe in personal freedoms, the Constitution. So, you know, I think that libertarians themselves are not united about anything. I had a friend.
Phil's over
called, yeah, I had a friend called Peter Bayhuth who ran Greenpeace for many, many years. I went camping with him for about 3 weeks. We had a campaign down in Mexico years ago trying to stop Mitsubishi from building a big salt mine and a whale sanctuary down there. And I ended up in a tent, got to be very close to him, and he ran Greenpeace. I said, at one point, what's it like running Greenpeace? And he said, it's like being in charge of 1.2 million people, and the only thing they have in common is they all despise authority. and that's, to me, the libertarians always seem, like that. It's a very democratic and kind of chaotic version of democracy. It's the opposite of the duopoly, which are now these kind of top-down tyrannical systems that are run by corporations, by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and the pharmaceutical companies, and the big war companies, the big military contractors, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed, and the oil and coal companies. They're all taking money from the same people, and it's all this kind of very, very top-down systems, and the libertarians are the opposite of that. They're bottom-up. They're all iconoclastic. There's no real unifying theme except for freedom, which I like a lot.
And their view of freedom is very differently.
Very differently.
Some people here think there should be no borders.
Yeah.
Some people here think there should be strong borders. and they both argue that it's freedom.
Yeah, that's right. They're the kind of extreme versions. I first of all, I think their minds are really interesting because, that they, first of all, they're very thoughtful. They do critical thinking. They are completely, fiercely skeptical towards authority, which I like a lot. They're skeptical about any orthodoxies or official pronouncements, which I enjoy. And then they have the really extreme authority or libertarians have this kind of the system worked out in their heads that that works for them, where everything should be privatized.
Right.
And
I don't agree.
No, I don't agree.
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
I don't think you can privatize the commons. So I think capitalism works with private property, but there are certain assets that are just by their nature the shared assets of communities: the air, the water, wildlife, fisheries, public lands. And if somebody tried to privatize the Hudson River, it wouldn't be a good thing. You want public access to it. You want people to be able to use it for all different kinds of purposes. And so I think it falls apart. The philosophy, to me, falls apart in the commons, but I always enjoy talking with them about it.
Are you thinking that you're going to convince some of them to join you, vote for you, support you?
I think a lot of them are support. We've gotten good support from the libertarians from the beginning, so I don't know how much convincing they need. I think there's people who are adamantly against me because of my position on Gaza. I think that from the outset, that most of them are very, very supportive of my position on Ukraine, and I was one of the first national political figures to come out and say this war is a hoax. And and I think that, they like my free market approach to environmentalism and a lot of other stuff that I talk about. So we've gotten from the beginning, when I was campaigning in New Hampshire a year ago, the biggest, we were going to Freedom Fest, and the biggest groups that were, were we getting the best crowds, the most enthusiastic crowds were libertarian crowds. I lost a lot of them on Gaza.
What's your Gaza position? I'm against war. But I think in the last 100 years, we've only fought one war that I would call a moral war, which was World War II, because we were attacked. It was a defensive war. We were attacked by an enemy, an implacable enemy that was committed to the obliteration of our value systems, of our country, etc. And so, to me, World War I was a bad war, was a war of choice. My grandfather protested it, lost all of his friendships, lost a lot of relationships and business opportunities because of that. But I think the Gaza war, from Israel's point of view, is a defensive war. They were attacked. They were attacked not just on October 7th, but they were attacked for 16 years since Hamas took over Gaza. I'm very pro-Palestinian. I have friends in Gaza. I've been to the West Bank. I met with the Palestinian Authority leadership. I have an organization in Israel that's the only organization, it's a water protection group on the Jordan River, that has Palestinians, Jordanian Arabs, and Israel Jews on it. I'm very, very supportive of the aspirations of the Palestinian people. I think Hamas is the biggest enemy of the Palestinian people. And, Palestinian people have, I'll just tell you this, have received more money, more than almost 20 times what Europeans received during the Marshall Plan. So between 1944 and 1948, we rebuilt 17 nations that had been destroyed in Europe after World War II. We spent to do that, in 2023 dollars, $626 per capita for all the people in those countries. In the last 30 years, international aid agencies have pumped $8,600 per capita to every single person in the Palestinian Authority, including a lot of people who aren't really there. Because the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA counts people who left long ago.
in order to continue to.
So would your position be not to send them any money? And would you also not send any money to Israel then, as president of the United States?
No, what I would do, what I think we should be doing is diplomatic solutions, but we should, I think we need to do a Marshall Plan for Gaza after the war, but I don't think that the war can end until Hamas is eliminated. I don't think you can be giving money to Hamas.
Yeah. So today, the United Nations top court actually just ordered Israel to immediately halt its operations in Rafah. The United States and the Biden administration asked them not to do this, and Israel just did it anyway. How would you handle the situation as president of the United States?
Well,
would you allow them to continue that? Would you allow American service members to be there?
American service members aren't there. Israel's
yes, they are. They're actually in the water. They actually set up a pier
they're on the
and
beach
a port, and now they're being attacked. So, as president of the United States, how would you handle the Rafah situation, and would you put our American troops there like they are currently?
No, I would not send American troops to Israel. But I would support Israel with arms and weapons. I think the International Court of Justice, part of the United Nations just has an ingrained hostility to Israel, and the United Nations has issued, I think, 14 condemnations in the last 5 or 6 years against Israel, one against North Korea, none against any of these other nations that are that are actually committing human rights abuses all the time. Israel is the only democracy in the Mideast. It's the only place where everybody can vote, whether you're Arabs or Jews. You have all equal rights. Arabs in Israel can run for every political office. There's 10 Arabs serving in the Knesset. They're serving on every level of the judiciary. They have freedom of speech. They have freedom of religion. In fact, there's 27 nations in the Mideast, and 26 of them have official religions.
But the question is, what would you do for Rafah?
Israel.
What would you do with Rafah? You never answered the question.
Real quick, I want to pull this up. This is important to what you're asking, Luke. This is from USNI.org. U.S. soldiers critically injured during Gaza pier operation. 2 other service members hurt. These are non-combat related injuries, but this is U.S. service members. They are armed. Lloyd Austin said that they are allowed to return fire. They are currently under fire from Hamas in Gaza. And so based on what Luke was asking, I ask, knowing that the U.S. is doing this, they're building a pier, should you get elected, would you call these troops back and cancel the construction of this pier?
Yeah, I would have to look at the whole pier project. I've been ambivalent about that project from the beginning. I'm not sure that it's necessary. But I would have to understand it better. I read both the literature propaganda coming out of Israel and the propaganda coming from Hamas. And it's unclear to me how, what Israel says. There's plenty of supplies going into Gaza, that there is no shortage of supplies, that the problem in Gaza is that Hamas is stealing the supplies rather than distributing them.
Well, the Pentagon is also reporting just 2 days ago that the aid is actually not getting through to the people of Gaza.
Well, and that's what Israel's been saying, that they can't. The problem is not a lack of supplies. The problem is that Hamas won't allow anybody to have access to the supplies. And
that's the same reason that
chronic complaint.
It's the same reason Gaza hasn't had water is because of Hamas,
Well, no, Israel shut off the water and electricity.
No,
Hamas is taking the water pipes.
They took some of the water pipes, correct, but then Israel did shut off the water and did shut off the electricity to 2 million people, not just combatants.
No. Israel, first of all, Israel only controls about 9% of the water. The water, in most of the water, about 81% or 91% of the water in Gaza comes from 6 desalination plants. Those plants are dependent on oil, on fuel and bunker fuel. And what Israel says is there is plenty of that fuel in Gaza, but they're using it to fire rockets into Israel rather than to operate their desal plants. And there's plenty of evidence of that because Israel's been hit by about 20,000 rockets since October 7th, and they consume a tremendous amount of fuel. So what Israel says is they got plenty of oil. They're just not used. They are starving their own people. And we see this, this scapegoating all the time where Jews, the only Jewish nation, is being blamed for crimes that Hamas is committing. if a bank robber robs a bank and grabs a hostage and is firing over the hostage's shoulder at the police, and the police fire back and hit the hostage, you don't blame the police, you blame Hamas.
But at the same time, we don't blow up Times Square if there's a terrorist inside of Times Square. So that's another kind of situation that would counter your situation. But back to the question about Rafah.
Depends on how many terrorists are in Times Square.
Of course, when we went into Ramallah, when we went into Mosul, we killed a lot more civilians than Israel is doing here. Right now, there's a war going on in Yemen, where our allies, where the United Arab Emirates, the Saudis, are bombing civilian targets. They've killed already 350,000 civilians, 10 times. People only complain when Israel kills civilians.
I completely agree.
Civilians are killed.
Well, they're working with Al Qaeda too.
Agree.
They're working with Al Qaeda in Yemen as well. But back to the question.
I think the question is actually, should this be America's priority right now?
Yeah.
Is this the thing that America should be considering over other domestic issues that we have? I understand the humanitarian crisis, the loss of life is tragic, but as president, I wonder, is this the thing that you prioritize over the more serious domestic issues like the border, like our own, economic crisis?
I would say this. Now, my priority is, as president, is going to be with the United States. I wouldn't be sending any money to Ukraine at all, not a penny. But Israel, because for all the reasons, Ukraine's a war of choice. It's a war that we helped provoke. It's a war that Putin has been trying to settle on terms that are very, very favorable to us, and we keep on, making Zelensky tear up the agreements. And so the question is, do we have an interest in supporting Israel? And does the U.S. have a legitimate interest or an important national interest in supporting Israel? And I would say the answer to that is yes. We give a tiny fraction to Israel, what we've put into Ukraine. A large amount of the money that we historically send to Israel goes to the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome is this unique system, a defensive system, so that Israel will not have to invade Gaza. Nobody else would do this. Since Hamas took over Gaza, they fired an average of 2,000 missiles a year onto civilian centers in Israel. People say Gaza has the highest population densities in the world. That's not true. Tel Aviv has twice the population density it's got, and that's where Hamas is sending missiles onto a civilian population. There's 1 million Israelis who live in bomb shelters. And Israel, any other nation that was attacked by a smaller, less powerful nation that was committed to its destruction, its annihilation, the extermination of its people, would go in there and carpet bomb it from the air and destroy it.
Yep.
Israel didn't do that. Israel built an Iron Dome so it would not have to go in. And that is where, a large percentage of the money that we send to Israel is going to that Iron Dome. So I believe, and Israel for us in the Mideast is a bulwark for democracy. It's a bulwark for U.S. interests. If Israel was limited, a Palestinian friend of mine told me this the other day. He said, many Palestinians understand that we need a strong Israel, because if Israel ceased to exist, we would be at the mercy of Iran. And Iran doesn't care about us. Iran does not care about the Palestinian people. Look what they've done with Hamas. So they built 300 miles of tunnels for fighters and not a single bomb shelter for civilians.
We can certainly loop back to this, but I do want to make sure we can get it. I don't want to just turn into an hour-long debate over Israel, because that's usually what happens. But I'm curious about the domestic issues, and it does pain me a little bit to have to ask the really boring and obvious question, but it's the one that matters most to people, and that's currently people are struggling. They can't afford their groceries. The media keeps saying there's nothing to worry about. The inflation is fine. And then when working class people try to feed their kids, they're finding that it's harder and harder to actually buy groceries. I wonder your view on the economy and what you could do as president that would change this for the American people.
I mean, I think that there's an assault on the middle class in this country, and it's been going on since 1980, but it really exploded during COVID when we shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation, no scientific citation. We shifted $4 trillion upward from the American middle class. We obliterated the middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. We created a billionaire day globally in 500 days, 500 days, 500 new billionaires. And, you know, a lot of those businesses will never reopen. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. And a lot of them had 3 generations of equity in them. And then, you know, because we've spent $8 trillion on war since 2001, we've spent, we didn't have that money. We borrowed it from China and we printed the money. So, and that is why we're having inflation.
Do you think,
and that's why we have $4 bread, $4 milk, and $6 gasoline.
do you think that's irreversible then? Do you think that cutting the war funding might alleviate some of this tension?
It's complicated because you can't cut. First of all, we have to make dramatic cuts. In essentially what are orphaned investments, which is war is an orphan investment. You spend $1 million on a missile, $60,000 on a backpack missile, $1 million on a tank. You send it to somewhere to get destroyed, and it doesn't produce any kind of economic benefits. If we're going to, we cannot. We're at a point now, $34 trillion in debt. $8 trillion of that is from Trump. Another $7 trillion is from Biden. And Trump ran up a bigger debt, spent more money than every president before him, from George Washington to George W. Bush, in 283 years. Neither of them are going to deal with this issue. It's so large right now. We're spending more on servicing that debt than our entire defense budget. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we collect in taxes is going to go to the debt. Within 10 years, 100%. So it's existential. You need to cut dramatically spending on, and those cuts will come from the military, which we need to cut down to about $500 billion a year from $900 billion. We need to close most of the 800 bases that we have abroad, which are just invitations for new wars. The biggest savings is going to come from ending the chronic disease epidemic, which is now, you know, the biggest part of our budget, $4.3 trillion. It's 5 times the military budget. So it was 6% of GDP when my uncle was president, and it's about 20% today. You know, we've gone from 6% of kids having chronic disease in our country to 60%. We're the only country that has this. We have the highest chronic disease burden in the world. We need to cut that, but you can't just cut it and solve the debt problem. You actually need to cut it and then invest it in things that are going to expand the economy. You have to grow your way out of this existential crisis, not just cut your way out of it.
Mr. Kennedy, even beyond that, everyone knows that the mandatory spending is the actual driver of all of our major economic problems. So, considering nobody's going to touch Medicare and Medicaid, how do we have a plan that can actually fix the problem of Medicare and Medicaid without leaving seniors and people that are planning for it, which there's too many Americans that are planning for it now, but the people that are actually planning for it, how do we fix the problem for them without leaving them high and dry?
Well, you know, the places where we need to get about $4 or $5 billion from the military. We need to reduce chronic disease from $4.3 billion a year to $4.3 trillion a year to about a quarter of that. And then we can do cuts, particularly with AI. We can identify ways. I'm going to also use blockchain to make our entire budget transparent so that everybody can identify ways. And that's where I'm going to get the money. So I'm not going to cut Medicare. I'm not going to cut Social Security. That's a contract with the American people. What I'm going to do is reduce the cost of treating illness in this country. Everybody else talks about, when they talk about health care, they're talking about whether it's Obamacare or single payer or public, private, hybrid or whatever. But it's all about, that's all of those propositions. The big battles that are fought over are about moving deck chairs around on the Titanic. The whole ship is sinking, and it's sinking because of the explosion of chronic disease.
Do you think?
So you think you think that we can essentially innovate our way into a position where
I think we can eliminate chronic disease.
Yes. Okay.
Do you think former President Trump and President Biden talk enough about this issue? It seems to me.
I think they talk zero about this issue. The issues, people always say that Trump and Biden, we have to choose. There's this, this apocalyptic choice between these two guys. And if you look at them, they are very different. Their personalities are different. Their dispositions are different. Their their ideologies, the way they approach issues and people. But if you actually look at the issues that they dispute on, it's a very narrow Overton window. It's all these culture war issues: abortion, guns, the border, trans rights, all important issues. But none of them are existential. The existential issues they will never mention because they can't do anything about. The budget deficit, they cannot fix that because they're the ones that created it. They can't create, the chronic disease epidemic, they presided over. The war machine, they're both warmongers now. Trump says he's not, but, he just gave a bear hug to Speaker Johnson and then, a kiss on the cheek to Biden and sent all that money to Ukraine. The polarization, which is more toxic now in this country than any time since the American Civil War, and poisonous and destructive, and it's all amplified by social media algorithms, and nobody even understands how they're working anymore. They're all designed to pour concrete on that polarization and divide us farther and farther until we go into civil war. Somebody's got to step in the middle and say, I'm not going to do that. And neither of them can do it because they're both the products of the polarization. They're both telling us to hate the other guy and hate the other side. They can't end it.
I don't know how anyone could end it, to be honest.
Look at my campaign. I've got an equal number of people who are Trump, by Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. I'm almost evenly divided. I beat both Trump and Biden among independents, which is now the biggest political party. This year, independents self-identified, for the first time in history, self-identified independents, 43% of the American public.
That's huge.
27% are Democrats, 27 Republicans, and I get them. I beat them among people under 35. And the reason, the way that I've done this is by not feeding into the vitriol, not feeding into the anger, not feeding into, all of this.
But you you initially launched your campaign as a Democrat. I guess my question would be, when did you stop being a Democrat, or are you still,
no, but
how do you classify yourself?
Go look at my announcement speech. My whole announcement speech is, I'm not going to feed into this. I'm not going to go to the culture war issues. I'm going to focus on the values that hold Americans together, rather than these little issues that are orchestrated to keep us at each other's throats, so that all the money continues flowing upward to BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, which own today 89% of the S&P 500. They're now trying to buy all the real estate in our country, and they are going to turn us from an ownership society into a rental society. And they love us hating each other because it keeps it all flowing upward.
I think you're right in identifying existential crises, BlackRock, State Street, etc. But I do think that the culture war issues are another form of existential crisis. Perhaps it's easier to say, if BlackRock buys up all the homes, it's harder and harder for working class people to get homes. If there's collusion between big banks, Federal Reserve, and the government, they're going to strangle out the working class and money overseas to wars we shouldn't be involved in, military bases. But there are deep concerns about the birth rate, fertility rate, and that is abortion. Abortion is an existential crisis, especially when we're looking at less than replacement rates for this country.
What do you mean? First of all, I don't disagree with you on abortion. I want to do everything we can to end abortion. Our plan, which is more choice, more life, is about addressing the fact that 52% of abortions in this country are among women who say that one of the major factors was their inability to afford a baby. And I want to make sure that is not their consideration. But let me ask you this. When you say the fertility problem is due to abortion, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's compounded by it. So
you mean it's because fewer people are having babies?
Yeah. I don't think abortion is the principal reason we're facing a replacement level price
There's
problem.
a global fertility issue right now.
But
I would say that has to do with toxics in the environment
Plastics in the balls.
Well, there's a lot of stuff. There's
That's true. That was in the news.
No. There's PFAs. There's forever chemicals. There's astrazine. There's microplastics in male testicles. There's fluoride. There's glyphosate. Out of all these things, what do you think is the biggest concern? Because there's a lot of things in our environment.
Fertility.
When it comes to when it comes to our larger health crisis, do you think it's PFAs, forever chemicals, astrazine, fluoride, microplastics, glyphosate? What is the top concern for you biologically?
I'll tell you something interesting, which might answer that. There are the autism. We've got crises in 4 categories of diseases. Obesity, which is sort of linked to diabetes, autoimmune disease. Obesity's gone from when my uncle was president about 13% to 50% of kids today obese or grossly overweight. Autoimmune diseases, which is juvenile diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, lupus, all these exotic diseases. Diabetes, when I was a kid, the average physician saw 1 case of diabetes in his lifetime over a 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is pre-diabetic or diabetic. And the cost of diabetes, which is mitochondrial dysfunction, is now larger than the military budget, and nobody's asking where this is coming from. Neurological disease, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, autism. When I was in my generation, 70-year-old men, the rate of autism is 1 in 10,000. In my kids' generation, it's 1 in every 34, according to CDC, 1 in every 22 boys. So what happened? Congress, and there's one other category, which is allergic diseases, which is peanut allergies, eczema. None of these. I had 11 siblings. I had 70 cousins. I never knew anybody with a food allergy, a peanut allergy, but 5 of my 7. Why do 5 of my 7 kids have it? What happened? Something happened. Nobody's asking what it is. And there's an EPA, or Congress said to EPA, tell us what year the autism epidemic began. And EPA is a captive agency, but it's captive by oil and coal, not by big pharma. So it actually did a real study, and it came back and said it's a red line 1989. So and as it turns out, almost all of these diseases follows that timeline. And this explosion of chronic disease, we go from 6% to 60%. And there's a famous doctor, a toxicologist in New York named Phil Landrigan, and I've used him on a lot of my cases, suing all kinds of big industries for toxins. He's one of the most revered toxicologists in the world. He looked at this issue and he said, you have to figure out a toxin. And these are being called because this disease is being caused by toxic exposures. It can't be genes. Genes don't cause epidemics. You need environmental exposure. And, the genes can provide a vulnerability, but you need that toxin. So what could it be? That became ubiquitous in 1989. And there's a couple of other flags identifying signals. One of those that the neurological injuries affect boys at a 4 or 5 to 1 rate as girls. So he went and looked at this, and he came down with he's done a series of papers on this question. So I'm getting to your answer. He came down with about 13 things, and among them are glyphosate from Roundup, which follows that timeline exactly, neonicotinoid pesticides, atrazine, which is now in 70% of our water supply, PFOAs and PFASs, which are flame retardants. I litigated one of the biggest case on that, and they made a movie about my case called Dark Waters, and it was starring Mark Ruffalo. It's a flame retardant that was put in all of our kids' pajamas, all of our furniture that year, and around that time, 1989. Fluorides, all of these byproducts, these endocrine disruptors that are part of plastics, high fructose corn syrup.
Oh yeah,
right, and then cell phone radiation. One of the exposures is ultrasound, which I don't think has a lot to do with it, but it became ubiquitous on exactly that timeline. So, the problem is that NIH will not let anybody study this. If you're a scientist, you try to study this, you can't get funded. And if you do manage to get funded, your career is over. They will destroy you. So NIH has turned from when I was a kid, it did cutting edge science. It was the gold standard science agency in the world. Now it is just an incubator for pharmaceutical products.
So I want to go to the broader, because I want to try. I want to try and get as many subjects in as possible, but back to abortion and the fertility rate, just to stay on that point and elaborate. You mentioned existential crisis, the things that Biden and Trump aren't talking about, the things you are talking about, especially what you just talked about, I think is one of the most important. And I'll add this as an aside. In our studio, we do have plastic bottled water, but we have refillable glass bottles for people to take if you don't want to use the plastic for this reason. And then we have plastic because it is ubiquitous. It's like, I mean, what am I going to do? I'm going to order. I know we have.
Yeah, it's hard to live without it.
But we bought reusable glass bottles that we fill up with our own filtered well water, specifically because of the issue of, biphenyls and all of these things. But the issue with abortion, there are people on the right who they've brought this up to us on the show, pro-lifers, people who want to see it banned federally in every capacity, saying when you're dealing with below replacement level fertility, abortion just exacerbates the issue. So to them, it does seem existential. I don't know that abortion is the principal reason for dropping in fertility. I think a lot of everything you brought up is actually a really good reason for this, the toxic exposure and all of these things. But my point ultimately was that abortion certainly is existential for a lot of people if babies' lives are being ended.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need a government that prioritizes the family.
I don't think, I think the argument, you kind of lose me on the argument about abortion and the decline, fertility rate decline and decline in population, that we need to force women to carry babies to term in order to keep, a national population level. I don't think to me, that's not a compelling argument. The compelling argument is the moral argument that abortion at some point, particularly when the baby reaches viability, is, at the end of the term is like homicide, right? It's and throughout there, people have different arguments, different opinions of it, and I respect everybody's opinion. But there's a moral case from day one for not doing it, and that moral argument to me is the most compelling argument and the most difficult argument, the most complex argument. The other argument that you made about replacement rates is a really important argument for all these toxics in our environment, but when it comes to, there's so many other complexities. The state going to tell a woman who does not want to bring a child to term that you're going to force them to do that. So, so these are all kind of very complex, difficult, heartbreaking issues, and every abortion is a tragedy. Everyone is a trauma. To me, there's no simple issue. I come from a family that is split on it. I've gone back and forth on the issue. When I learn more material, my position has shifted slightly.
Well,
but it's because it's such a tough issue.
I completely agree. I think there's of all the issues, this one has zero middle ground at all. You had got a lot of flack because you were in an interview where you said that the state and the federal government should not be involved in any capacity, and you were asked should abortion be allowed even up to full term. You had said yes. You had then changed your position. And do you want to clarify and give it?
Do you want me to tell you the evolution of my thinking?
Yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what I always say to people is you can never convince me of things by telling me it's the politically, beneficial thing to do, or by calling me names, or by doing all the things that I've had all the defamations and perjuries that have been applied to me. That's not going to change my mind about anything. What will change my mind is facts. So my original position on abortion, which made sense to me when I was asked just off the cuff without thinking about it, by an NBC reporter very early in the campaign when I was in Iowa. He said, "What's your position?" And I said, "Well, I think it has to be up to a woman, 100% up to a woman, up to the point of viability, and then the state has an escalating interest in protecting that life. So I got a tremendous amount of flack from the left and also at home from my wife, her sisters, or her sister and her sister's wife were big supporters of mine, but we're absolutely, it is always a woman's choice. You know, in the state, you've been a medical freedom advocate for your entire life. You've been fighting for people's bodily autonomy more than anybody in this country. You've taken more flack from it. Now you're trying to take that choice away from the woman. And, you know, and so I then changed my position and said, it's a woman's choice right up to the end. Now the question for me was, my assumption and my wife's assumption is there's no woman who's going to get pregnant and carry that pregnancy to 9 months and have an abortion, you know, the 9th month. Who would do that? The only reason that would happen in my mind was if either the baby had some illness that he was only going to live for maybe 24 hours or 2 weeks and then have an agonizing death, or if the mother's life, there's some medical issue with the mother's life is at risk. And in those cases particularly, I don't want to invite the state in to have anything to do with it. I don't want a bureaucrat having anything to do with it. The mother should be making that decision.
Even if she prioritizes herself over the unborn child?
What?
Like, even if she prioritizes herself over the unborn child? Because you're talking about bodily autonomy, but in this case,
I would say yes, that it's
the
the mother.
baby wouldn't have bodily autonomy. They wouldn't even have a choice.
I would say that, yes, it's the mother in that situation. If the mother has a risk of her life, and you know, and it is incumbent that she has to abort the baby or to save her life, I would say yes. That's the mother's choice, always. And you could differ with me on that. To me, that is the moral and ethical position. Now, however, after I gave that interview, a number of people contacted me, including many from my campaign and many outside of my campaign, and they showed me that actually there are a fair number of thousands of elective abortions that occur in the 8th and 9th month. And I showed that data to my wife and to her sisters. They said, okay, we got it. And so I changed my position that back to essentially my original position, and I didn't say to my wife, I told you so, because that would have made my life even more difficult. But I said I changed it back to my original position, which is that the state has an escalating interest in that child once they reach viability.
I got some constitutional questions for you to elaborate on this and then to go into gun rights. So the 14th Amendment says in Section 1, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof and subject to jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. What I find interesting in this is that person and citizen there's a distinction. And this has led to interpretations as well as other amendments that tourists, for instance, are protected under the Constitution because they are a person, not a citizen, but they shall not be deprived of life or liberty or property. When I look at this, I feel like there's only one conclusion. If the Supreme Court were to rule on the matter, I don't see how you would claim that a baby at 9 months is not a person. And so
let me ask you. Now you're talking, a legal application rather than a moral or ethical.
Absolutely, yeah.
Read me again, because I'm not seeing this. Read me the first line.
The first line of Section 1 is all persons born or naturalized.
Okay. So it says born,
but persons is separate from citizen.
But it's all persons born.
No, it's not. So it says all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens. It then later states after a semicolon, nor shall any state deprive any person. There's a distinction between person and citizen.
Okay. Well, if you're asking me to give you lawyer's advice,
no, I'm
not about whether that's a.
I'm not asking you to interpret. I'm saying that if someone is a tourist,
you can make that argument. I get the argument. Again, I don't think the legal argument is convincing. I think the moral and ethical arguments are much more convincing.
My question is, the reason there's a distinction between citizen and person is that if someone is a tourist from, say, India to the United States, they have free speech. They have many rights. They're protected under the Constitution, speedy trial, all of these things. And it's why there's a distinction between person and citizen. I believe that there's a philosophical conundrum on the issue of abortion. And I'm not saying you have to agree, and I'm not saying that this is absolute. I'm saying that when you look at, you have two women. They're both pregnant. They've been pregnant for an identical amount of time, 9 months. One woman goes into early labor and gives birth to her child. The other woman does not. The babies are identical in every way, just hypothetically speaking, but one was born and one wasn't. Right now in the United States, we recognize in some states the rights of the baby as it is in the womb. Like I believe in California, if a crime is committed against the woman that kills the baby, it's considered double murder, double homicide. But as an individual, only after birth. I see a legal conundrum there, which presents an interesting challenge in the Constitution as to how the Supreme Court would rule on personhood. I'm just curious your thoughts on. I suppose maybe I don't know. Would you abstain on the issue, or do you think that a baby at 9 months is a person or not a person, or is it?
Well, I don't think bringing in the legal definitions for me. It's not helpful to your argument because it says born, and I understand
but citizen say born.
I understand you're making a distinction between if you're a citizen, you have to be born, and if you're a person, it's ambiguous whether.
Well, persons are persons. The question is, what does a Supreme Court interpret a person to be?
Right. So, but anyway, what I would say to you, Tim, is that for me, the question is not whether you want to untangle legal language and see if it's applicable. If you want to do that, bring the lawsuit and go to the Supreme Court and see what they say. And, I can make a bet on what they'd say, and you can make a bet, and we may bet the same, we may bet different. But the question here that's difficult for me is not this question. The question here is the moral question and the ethical question. And I'm not claiming to have resolved those. I'm just claiming to have a solution that is to me is the most livable solution in a very difficult, impossible ethical question.
I think the main challenge, the reason why I bring this up, the reason why I go for the 14th is when you look at a state like Oklahoma, they've banned abortion outright. When you look at Colorado, they've unrestricted it to the point of birth. So we were talking about hyperpolarization and, launching off from the question of abortion, because I don't really want to have another, 5-year debate on abortion. I understand there's no middle ground, but you can see this polarization where when I argue with progressives, basically a similar position to you, I mostly agree with your position. They say I'm pro-life. When I say that if the baby can survive, there's no reason to kill it. And, even I think elective abortion is wrong. Like everything you said, it's a tragedy. It shouldn't happen. I find challenges in how the law would actually step in to determine when abortions could or couldn't happen. I don't have good answers for it. Progressives call me pro-life for saying that. And conservatives call me pro-choice.
Well, I would think you'd be proud to be pro-life. My cousin, Anthony Shriver, who's working on my campaign, is radically pro-life. And he's proud of it. And, Angela Stanton King, who is working on my campaign, who's a close advisor to me, is radically pro-life. And she's proud of it. And I respect them. I respect their position. I'm not claiming I'm right about this. Morally, I'm going to have to talk to God at some point and justify my positions. And I'm just doing my best with it. I'm not. Yeah. But I want to do is do the best I can to have people just stop hating each other on this issue.
I agree.
We could agree to disagree. I'm pro-life, but we thank you for kind of explaining your thought process going through it. If you could Could you also do that with the Second Amendment?
That's what I was going to ask next.
Because last year you were arguing for an assault weapons ban. It does look like you changed your position on that.
I don't think I was ever arguing for assault weapons ban. But
you did. You said, quote, if we can get consensus on it, if Republicans and Democrats agree to it, and it passes Congress, I would sign it, specifically talking about an assault weapons ban. So it does look like you changed your position. Why did you change your position? And was there a legitimate reason, or is this kind of electioneering?
Yeah, I don't do electioneering. Oh, and anybody who looks at my record over 40 years, I think it's pretty obvious that I'm not swayed by by the political winds, or I would have lived my life very, very differently. I've taken on very difficult issues my whole life, and I've stuck with them even when the entire world was against me. So that's not what I do. On this issue, my position and what I said is that I'm not going to take anybody's guns away. I don't think it's the right. I just don't think it's right. And particularly, my thinking on a lot of these issues evolved during COVID. So, I would say during COVID, I saw this assault on the Constitution and understand that, it's something that we really need to be worried about. And the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution. I'm a constitutionalist. What I said is that that I'm not fighting for an assault weapons ban. If both houses of Congress, bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, all of a sudden came with a bill that they'd already passed, am I going to veto it on some kind of gun control measure? Some kind of assault weapons ban? Do you see that will ever happen? I don't think so.
Well, if the Democrats take Congress, they could, and it does look like the Democrats will.
But it wouldn't be bipartisan.
Yeah, like a bipartisan bill. I've always said that. So can I give you, my idea about something? You
can always just slide it forward, too.
I think the big issue that makes this such a toxic issue now is because of all the school shootings and the mass killings that involve weapons, involve, firearms. I look at this issue the same way I do to the chronic disease epidemic, and I say to myself, why is it happening? There's been no increase in guns since 1970. I think there's been one increase in the gun per household since 1970. There's been no legislation that changed guns ownership. When I was a kid, at my schools, we had gun clubs. People brought their guns to school. Nobody was shooting children. Nobody was shooting strangers. Something happened. And when the change, and it's happening in this country, and it's not happening elsewhere in the world. Switzerland, which has comparable numbers of guns, it's like maybe half or 70% or whatever it is. The last mass shooting in Switzerland, there's guns in every house in Switzerland. It's a law that requires it. The last mass shooting in Switzerland was 21 years ago. We have one every 21 hours. So what is causing it? The guns are a covariable, but it doesn't fit.
So what is causing it?
Well, it's usually gang-on-gang violence.
No, I'm talking about school shootings, not gang-on-gang violence. What I would say is there's some kind of exposure that's happening. And, when the Columbine attacks occurred, 5 of the families sued Prozac. And ever since then, there have been studies, although this is not an issue that is studied enough, and it's not studied using federal funding. But the impact of SSRIs and benzos on the potential impact on gun violence, this is one possible thing that needs to be studied. All of those products have black box warnings on them that say that they may cause homicidal or suicidal behavior. So they have that on their labels, on their manufacturer's inserts. So obviously that should be a suspect. And the timeline, there's 120 million SSRI prescriptions every year, 120 million benzo prescriptions, and then there's other 120 million Adderall prescriptions, right? And it says on the box. Now, we don't know. It's very hard to tell. It's hard to do studies. One is there was a law passed in 1997 and a policy adopted by NIH to not study the etiology or the origins of gun violence. So there's really almost no studies out there.
But so you're saying that the issue of gun violence is an issue of mental health and toxic
and
exposure.
Something else. It could be. Look, you just use your common sense.
But toxic
exposure. Maybe it's social media.
Yes.
Social media. It could be video games. It could be benzos. It could be SSRIs. Why aren't we studying these things?
All of it.
I mean, the Uvalde parents are suing a video game maker in response to this.
I think that's
I would say, to me,
just filed today.
The most likely, the thing that we should be studying is SSRIs, and nobody can really study it because of the HIPAA laws.
But
when there's these mass shootings occur, you never know if the guy was on SSRIs, and it's impossible to find out. But NIH could find out.
So I agree. I think probably we all agree on toxic exposure, drugs, benzos, SSRIs. All of these things are worrisome. But ultimately, for me, I lived in New Jersey, and we had a guy try to break in my house. I'm not allowed. They say I can have a gun. They made it as hard as possible for me to have a gun. The cops told me when they came to my house after I called the police, they said, if it were me, I'd have answered the door with a shotgun. And I said, oh, yeah, well, if I could get one. And so when I was finally able to get one, I was informed by the police that in New Jersey, you have a duty to retreat from your own home. So I'm in my own home in New Jersey. Someone breaks in with a gun and yells that they're going to kill me. I am legally required to seek exodus from my own home. And I asked the cop, I was like, where would I go? It's my house. And he goes, well, if you say that, you're telling the court you'd rather kill a man than stand outside in the cold, and they're going to put you in prison. I asked him, what would happen if someone broke into my house with intent to kill me and I defended myself with a weapon? He says, easy. You'd be arrested, charged with felony murder. You'd go to prison. You'd have your bail hearing. If you don't get it, you wait in jail until, you don't go to prison, you go to jail. You wait your hearing until you get your day in court with your affirmative defense of self-defense. Good luck with that. You had a woman who drove from PA into Jersey, an older middle-aged woman, going to Atlantic City, got pulled over, told the cop, this is a famous story in Jersey, that she was a law-abiding citizen, and she said, I just want to let you know that I have my gun on me. And he said, out of the car, you're under arrest, felony charge. I moved to West Virginia, constitutional carry. And, for me, and better than anyone, the threats that with crazy people who are trying to cause harm. So for me, I understand all this stuff about drugs and gun violence and mass shootings, but I won't tolerate, because of the escalation in crime and violence, me losing my right to defend myself and my family and my property.
Okay.
So my point ultimately is, outside of the issue of toxic exposure and shootings, what's your position on 2A, preserving gun rights? We've got
like I said, I believe in the Constitution, and I believe in the right to bear arms.
My argument then goes beyond and says we have to repeal the National Firearms Act, which and its add-ons. I believe it's unconstitutional. I can ask you a simple question right now. Actually, do you think private entities in the United States should have the right to own nuclear weapons?
No, but
they do. And this is something whenever I talk to anybody in office, they always say no, it should not be of the person. Or Lockheed Martin maintains and produces nuclear weapons. They're a private entity, and they do it internationally. So it's always been in the United States that there are privateers, there's corsairs, individuals were able to own warships. But while we have made many strides, like DC versus Heller, the right to keep and bear arms, we have these laws that restrict the individual while allowing these massive multinational warmonger corporations to have nukes. Why can't I have, look, I live in my house. I want a short-barreled rifle with a suppressor so that I'm less likely to cause harm to people, so that I can target only on those who are threatening my life. But it's damn near impossible because of the NFA for me to actually get a weapon that is appropriate, safer. So I'm curious, would you go beyond? Would you work to repeal these laws, or you keep it as is, or would you
repeal the NFA and red flag laws?
Enough about the NFA. So, and I'm not going to make a
fair point.
I'm not going to make a statement about something I know absolutely nothing about, and I would like to look. I would need to look at a lot of data and all that. Yeah. But,
Mr. Kennedy, one of the things you mentioned, you were talking about SSRIs and mass shootings and stuff. Most of the time, when you're talking about mass shooting, or when mass shootings are discussed in press or in the media, it's not the type of mass shooting that tends to come to mind when you hear the term. So anytime more than 2 people are shot, they consider that a mass shooting. But that could be someone, that could be drug violence, gang violence and stuff like that, which is different than the massacre type where you get someone with a rifle going into a school or something like that.
But he was referring to schools specifically. So
fair enough.
We can draw the distinction.
So I do think that whereas mass shootings as a concept is something that we have to worry about, but what do you think are the best policies to fix the I don't want to sound callous, but the everyday gun violence that we see, the stuff that happens daily in cities across the country? Because as much as the mass shootings that we see, the rifles and stuff like that, the schools, hospitals, whatever, they're horrifying and they're terrible and they get attention. The real death toll is the people that die every day in your violence in the cities. So what do you think? What would your plan be to combat that kind of stuff if there is a role for the federal government?
I mean, I'd love to hear what your solution is. My solution is good policing. I think we need to reduce the negative interactions between police and minorities, which is a big issue in this country, but we don't do that by defunding the police. We need a strong police force. The way that I would work it is that I would, the same way that I work schools and charter schools, is to give the police chiefs of these municipalities a lot of power, but also tremendous responsibility, so that if there are racial incidents while you are police chief, that you get 3 strikes and you're out, and you're banned from being a police chief in the next town. And so you give responsibility to them, but you also give the power to them to protect people but you hold them responsible. And I think that that's the way to clean up some of the problems in the police forces. But I would not do it by defunding the police.
Do you think our culture values police?
Like a good idea from day one.
Yeah.
Do you think our culture values police, or do you think attitudes towards policing has declined since COVID and all the rioting over the summer?
Do I think what?
Our culture values police. Because we
cultural values?
Like, does our culture as Americans value police officers? Because you saw a backlash to the police, especially after George Floyd's death.
Well, I mean, I do. So, I grew up with, my father was the chief law enforcement officer in the land. I grew up with, a lot of affection for police and firefighters, and that was, that's my orientation. Oh, and a lot of my friends are cops, but I'm not blind to the fact that there are racial problems also in these. If you're a black kid, you're much more likely to get arrested, and I don't think that's right. Oh, I think we have to try to fix that. What's wrong with the police? But we don't do that by making all police feel badly. And I think we need to support the police. They put their lives on the lines every day, and we need to support them. We need to give them good work environments where the people who are the bad apples are taken out, and where they're giving good training on de-escalating, difficult situations. And I know a lot of this. I've seen enough of these studies that there's 2 groups that are responsible for these kind of bad incidences, and one is bad apples, who have a disproportionate number of them, and then young cops who just don't know how to de-escalate. They go into a situation where they're unfamiliar in a territory, a part of the city, they're frightened, and they don't have the skills or the training to de-escalate. So I think that needs to happen too.
So a lot of the things you say, I agree with. I'm I guess disaffected liberal is the way that I usually describe myself. Post-liberal in some ways. The left just calls me right wing or whatever. Fine. Elon Musk posted that meme. I don't know if you saw it, where the guy's standing on the left, but then the left moves super far away. But you had called Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day, and for me,
when was that?
You had a rally. I believe it was on Columbus Day, in which you referred to it as Indigenous Peoples Day.
I thought that was when you announced you're running as an independent.
Yeah, was that? I just checked. I just made sure that I had the statement correct. October 10th, 2023, the Examiner reported on you, referring to Columbus Day as Indigenous People Day, saying that you spoke about your father's visit to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in 1968. Gratefully, the renaming of Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day. It shows that our country is now ready to explore and to tell each other the untold histories of those dispossessed people who have previously languished on the margins, Kennedy said. Whatever you might think of such sentiments, it is not the stuff of Republican campaign rallies. I'm not a fan of the Confederacy by any means, but tearing down the statues unilaterally through activist efforts was terrifying. They not only did they tear down the statues through violent force without any kind of democratic process or legislative process, they tore down statues of Hans Christian Heg, who was a Union soldier fighting against slavery, wasn't even an American, didn't own slaves, and they tore down Frederick Douglass, who was a former slave, who's amazing and fought against slavery. When I see things like this, it's particularly worrying to me because erasing our history doesn't do anything but make us repeat it. It dooms us. So I'm curious your thoughts on ideas like this, what people would refer
first
to.
Of all, I don't think I ever said we should get rid of Columbus Day and replace it with Indigenous People Day, but I've spent 20% of my career defending and representing the tribes in the United States and in Canada and Latin America, suing big corporate polluters who are destroying their land, suing governments who have stolen their land and making sure that they're treated fairly. And, I think it's important for us to be part of a community where we can recognize all kinds of people. We can recognize Italian Americans to whom that is an important holiday. And at the same time, we can recognize the indigenous people who were, made the ultimate sacrifice of one of the greatest genocides in history, and that, they're right. My father always believed that our country would never live up to its ideals if we didn't make some kind of amends, meaningful amends to the, to the group that was exterminated in order for us to settle in this country. And I think it's a good aspiration for every American. I don't think it should be a left wing or right wing. I agree with you about the statues. I don't think it's a healthy thing or any culture to erase its history.
So would you condemn Charlottesville melting down the Robert E. Lee statue? They gave it to the African American History Museum, and then got those horrifying photos.
I have a visceral reaction against the attacks on those statues. I mean, I grew up, in Virginia. I know that, there were heroes in the Confederacy who didn't have slaves, and I just have a visceral reaction against destroying history. I don't like it. I think we should celebrate who we are, and that we should celebrate the good qualities of everybody. If we want to find people who are completely virtuous on every issue throughout history, we would erase all of history. And values change throughout history, and we need to be able to be sophisticated enough to live with, our ancestors who didn't agree with us on everything and who did things that are now, regarded as immoral or wrong because they, maybe they had other qualities that we want to celebrate. And clearly Robert E. Lee had extraordinary qualities of leadership and I don't think that I wouldn't have done that.
You, so it was your announcement as running as an independent candidate. You said, it's a hopeful sign now for our country that we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. It shows that we're ready as a nation. It shows that our country is now ready to explore and to tell each other the untold histories of those dispossessed people who have previously languished on the margins.
Yeah, you have problems with that?
With changing the name of our holiday?
I didn't say we're changing the name.
But, so...
People are welcome to call it Columbus Day, but it's also called Indigenous Peoples Day.
It's not.
This country's big enough for a lot of different people.
Sure, but the idea of Indigenous People Day was literally to take the name Columbus away.
Well, that's your idea. It's not mine.
Well, the activists literally said they were changing the name of Columbus.
But that's not my idea. It's it may be, or maybe some activists who want to do that. But I feel like that the indigenous people should have a day. If it overlaps, there's many, many holidays that overlap with each other, and that, we shouldn't be taking away from one group to give to another. But I do think we need to make a larger commitment to indigenous people because they have been systematically robbed and cheated, and we need to do what we can as a country to make sure that that there's some kind of amends for that past.
I agree that an Indigenous Peoples Day is fine, but it literally did start as a counter to Columbus Day.
Well,
and
but that's your beef,
Absolutely, it is.
Right,
yeah,
I'm not.
I mean, but
it's not the way that I look at it. So
I respect that you stand by it. I think for a lot of people, these are the cultural issues that we feel is existential. To have a holiday that we grew up with, to understand why it was good, despite bad things about Columbus, for sure, and colonization in general, we celebrate the good things. We try to condemn the bad and maintain the good.
I grew up, it was an Italian holiday.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think and I think that's kind of the justification for keeping it not, whether Columbus was a hero or a villain, but the fact that this is a way, like we have St. Patrick's Day for the Irish. It's an Italian holiday, and I'm not saying it should stop being an Italian holiday. And we can celebrate the contribution of the Italians to their country, and we can celebrate
then perhaps
contributions of the indigenous people of this country.
Perhaps on the next speech you give, you can say, on this Indigenous Peoples Day and Columbus Day, we are here to say.
Well, I'm not going to let you write my speeches for me. But
well, I mean, the concern is if your worldview is shifted, that Columbus Day is no longer the day you're celebrating the counter protest. That says a lot about how
Tim,
you see the world.
Let me tell you something, Tim. I respect you a lot. But I think what I've tried to do in this campaign is to not get sucked into culture war issues that I consider distractions. I think the big issues that we should be talking about, which you started with, is the fact that 57% of the people in this country cannot put their hands on $1,000 because if there's an emergency in their family, and if you are in that cohort and the engine light comes on in your car, it's the apocalypse because you can't afford that mechanic. You're not going to be able to get to work, and you're not going to be able to pay your rent. Then you're going to end up on the sidewalk homeless, and you're going to be circling a drain. And what BlackRock wants is for us to ignore the contribution they've made and the Fed has made and all of these big Wall Street's made to this situation and keep us fighting about Columbus Day or Indigenous People Day. I'm not feeding into that. These are economic issues, and that's why I'm running. I'm not running to feed into culture war issues on either side. You can dispute these activists any way you want. I'm not going to get involved in that issue.
But my point is, I completely agree with you about BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, all of these companies. The foreign influence on our social media. Before it was TikTok, we had concerns about Saudi investors with pieces of.
Look, I'm more concerned about the NSA and Facebook. And the CIA scraping all of our information. Facebook, as much as the Chinese are scraping, posts about teenage girls' kitty cats. They are. We have all the things that Edward Snowden told us. That these companies are deeply, deeply embedded with the CIA. If you have an abuser who's outside of your house, it's scary. And if you have the abuser inside of your house, it's much more frightening. And I'm more concerned about the CIA and the NSA manipulating public perceptions, censoring us, propagandizing us, using these social media sites to do that. And I am against the Chinese. Listen, if we're really concerned about the Chinese, here's what we should be concerned about. I've litigated against Smithfield Foods for years for polluting vast, vast landscapes in this country. Smithfield controls 30 to 40% of pork production in this country, and the landscapes in states like North Carolina, Iowa, all over this country, they're now 100% owned by the Chinese. That is a threat The Chinese are buying our landscapes, they're buying our food, they're controlling our universities, they're giving billions of dollars to universities and scraping in information, high technology information. They're deeply embedded with NIH and making bioweapons with them. They are, they're the principal creditor now in every nation in Latin America because we're spending $8 trillion on wars and they're bombing bridges and ports and schools and universities. Over that same period, they've spent $8 trillion building ports and roads and schools. And they're projecting economic power abroad and we're projecting military power and they're killing us because of that. And, we ought to be actually dealing with the real threat from China and not about silly issues like TikTok. I don't think, personally, I give you advice, which I know you won't take and you don't need. But this kind of issue, I think, detracts from your credibility. Let's talk about this.
I think there's a reason.
You got into this because of Wall Street.
And I think it's fair to say that we waited an hour and 15 minutes before bringing up issues like this for a reason.
Okay.
Why I say in the beginning we start with war and like spending issues, because I do recognize those are important. But we talk about, there's a reason why TikTok is in the news. TikTok's algorithms manipulate people's brains, and it is a digital toxin that kids are being exposed to. The same is true for less so X now, but X is a huge porn problem now. And people are wondering why, Elon is struggling with this, and they're hoping he takes care of it. Facebook has algorithmic manipulation. All of these things affect the underlying culture of our next generation. So when you have...
I agree 100%. What do we do about it? It's not getting China out. It isn't going to take it.
I think when I look at the issue of social media manipulation and TikTok, for instance, at the very least, we have seen FOIA requests of the U.S. government, which has resulted in... We learned Twitter, when it was still Twitter, was in regular communication with the federal government to suppress and censor negative information. Alex Berenson, for instance.
Yeah, that came from my lawsuit.
Absolutely. Fantastic work. It's
Kennedy
tremendous.
versus Biden, our discovery just showed what they're doing. And
100%. And that's one of the most important things that's happened in my lifetime. So I appreciate the work you've done on that. And on top of that, however, we can't do those same things to TikTok, which is outside of the U.S.'s control. So whatever your solution may be on that issue, the same thing that we see with X, Twitter, maybe X less so now, but Facebook especially, and YouTube, is happening with TikTok. No question, only it's a foreign adversary now. So it is something we have to deal with. And I think it is more pressing because, your lawsuit proves we can fight back and we can win to a certain degree. And I think your position here right now actually shows that we can win tremendously. How do we deal with China doing the exact same thing to us? And outside of China,
I'll tell you
too.
what, I would not ban TikTok. TikTok is first of all, I believe that in freedom of information, and I think that everybody should be able to get information from any source. I don't think we should be banning Al Jazeera. I don't think we should be banning RTTV. I want to hear everybody's information, everybody's position on all these different issues, and allow me to make up my mind.
But that's not what TikTok's doing.
The way that I would handle it, because I think the problem that you talked about is a universal problem. It's not just TikTok. It's not just China. It is Facebook. It's Twitter. It's YouTube. It's all of these. It's Google. That we're all being manipulated by algorithms that are extraordinarily powerful propaganda devices.
And they're influenced by the intelligence agencies domestically inside of the United States.
It's not just influence. They are,
They're running it, and they're banning people, and they're censoring people, and they have censored you before as well for expressing your speech and expressing larger concerns.
I'm probably the most censored person in the country.
And you were right about a lot of the things that you were censored for.
You're on the list. I don't know if you're the most censored
person. Who would be more? Arguably, I would say I am. And I won the lawsuit. And even in the Murthy versus Biden lawsuit, if you read Judge Doty's decision, 155 pages, the bulk of it is about me, because I was the first one that they officially started to censor 37 hours after he took the oath of office. The White House was directing Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube to remove me from their platforms. They took off my Instagram account, and they were obsessed with censoring me from the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with Robert.
Let me just say this. What I think that the way that I would handle this if I was, the king of the world, is that I would I think that all of them should be forced to have transparent algorithms.
Yeah.
Because any algorithm that you have is going to manipulate you. So
Right.
if you pass a law that says if you're going to operate in this country, you need a transparent algorithm, then you, Tim, choose your own. You choose a libertarian algorithm. I might choose right now. If you're a Democrat, you're living next door to a Republican, and you both ask the same question of Google or whatever, you're going to get two different answers because
Crazy,
they're
right?
going to give you the answer that's going to keep you on the site the longest, and they know that people like that they'll stay on longer if you're fortifying their worldviews. So they're pouring concrete on it. But if you can choose your own algorithm, then at least you know how you're being manipulated. You choose a Republican algorithm, a Democratic algorithm, and then you can say that to TikTok, and it's not about China. It's about, hey, if you want to operate in this country, you use a transparent algorithm because we're a democracy, and we want to avoid all kinds of manipulation, whether they're by our intelligence agencies or by yours.
I agree. That's something we should absolutely do. But that is still akin to putting the label on, you buy a pack of cigarettes and it's got a diseased lung on it. People are still going to buy them. So my concern with
okay, so what's your solution? Shut them all down?
Well, I think with the TikTok bill, the idea that a foreign adversary, namely one of I think it's 5 countries, can't have investment in specifically TikTok, I don't see as I see as a net positive. The thing that concerns me is, this morning we did an interview with Tuan, who escaped the Chinese Communist Party, and they talked about their strategies, their worldview, how they operate. And we can see a lot of that reflected in how TikTok promotes certain content. So you've got teenagers being fed content where guys are saying, hate your parents, don't talk to your parents. You've got individuals that are living, they're encouraging self-harm and things like this. You mentioned why is Tourette's is one of the mental afflictions on the rise. There was a study that found women, young girls, were watching viral TikToks and Instagrams of a woman with Tourette's and then began adapting this as a social, contagion of some sort, started developing Tourette's on their own from it. China is absolutely invested in causing friction at the very least and harm in the worst case through these platforms. I think when the divestiture bill, aka the ban bill, gets passed, the response from TikTok immediately was, we will never sell, we will never back down, we will lay off our staff before we let you take this from us. I think shows that there's a great degree that this is more of an economic weapon than it is just a social media platform business they have. I mean, it's crazy to me that we learned from the CEO, what did he say? 175 million people use the app, and many of them are U.S. businesses. Why do we allow the CCP control over any portion of our economy, especially to that size? So I don't want them buying farmland. I don't want them buying real estate. And I don't want them buying a digital portion of our market that we can't regulate or control so the transparency is good, but
the control that China has of our market, because of TikTok, it's like a drop in the ocean compared to the hundreds of trillions of dollars in U.S. dollars that they own.
Totally agree. And BlackRock's way worse.
There's a million things that China's doing that are worse than TikTok. And so, again, listen, I'm an absolutist when it comes to free speech. I think that, we ought to have, and there's other reasons that we want to preserve TikTok, which is it's a gateway for young kids. We have a whole generation of kids who are not, have no entree, they have no equity, and they're never going to own a home. They have no way to get into business, to finance business, and they're building businesses on TikTok. And I don't want to take that away from them. I see so many hopeless people who come up to me and say, I made a life for myself. I made a place for myself. I have self-esteem because of it. And now the government's going to shut me down. 80% of TikTok is owned by Americans.
Well, because Douyin is the Chinese app.
Yeah, there's 2. Yeah.
And theirs is all patriotism.
Listen, I agree there is an issue, but for me, you and I are going to differ on this because I just am a free speech absolutist, and I think this is feeding into the neocon narratives that we need to war posture against China.
I don't disagree, but I feel like it's kind of like saying I'm a free market absolutist. I don't mind that China is sending fentanyl over the southern border because people have a right to buy whatever they want.
Well, that's not I don't agree with that. I don't think this is fentanyl, though.
Mr. Kennedy, you mentioned the transparency of algorithms, and it brought to mind something that is an issue that we are facing with China, and that's intellectual property. And I know interesting here talking about intellectual property at the Libertarian committee or
Convention.
National Convention, but there is a problem with China and with industrial espionage and stuff. Do you think that there's a role that the federal government should play in trying to assist corporations that are U.S. based, or try to give some kind of incentive to have corporations to be less, I guess, in bed with China, or a little more opposed to being so easy to work with China, considering the threat that China's...
Well, China bought off the Biden administration. They effectively instituted a lot of the policies for them already. And then
Mr. Kennedy, what do you think about industrial espionage and stuff? Do you think the federal government has a role for that?
I think China has a system that has been in place since Deng Xiaoping to steal technology from Western nations and from the United States. I've written chapters about this in my book about Wuhan. I think it's very, very worrying. I think they've infiltrated most of the universities in our country, that they're systematically stealing patents. I've done business in China, and the whole business model is to steal patents from Western companies, and most of the businesses that I've dealt with will not deal in China because of because of the patent issue. And you have companies like Microsoft. Microsoft has sold its soul to China. It's developing all of the surveillance and the control and the compliance technologies in China. Bill Gates could not attract enough innovators in the United States to compete against his competitor Apple and the other Google and all the other competitors.
Yeah, and Bill Gates is building mini nuclear reactors right now with the Chinese government. I want to talk about Bill Gates a little bit because he kind of bragged about going after you inside of the Trump administration. But it's also the CIA that worked with China, especially when it came to EcoHealth Alliance and the Wuhan laboratory. So there's a lot of other connections here that do deserve to be made. But Bill Gates was one of the few individuals that actually came out on national television, and he said that he was able to thwart your efforts, that you had private meetings with Donald Trump and you were working towards achieving some goals together on helping the American people, specifically regarding health. Bill Gates said he came in there and then he was able to influence Trump not to do what you wanted. Is there anything else that you could speak to about this? Because it does seem like he does have a larger influence over Trump.
No, I mean, I don't know exactly what happened. Bill Gates in January of 20... Sorry.
You can always just pull it towards you. You
in January of 2016, asked me to come to, and this is when he had first gotten elected, and he asked me to come to New York and to meet with him. And I spent the day with him and with his sons and with Steve Bannon and Hope Hill and Kellyanne Conway and Mike Pence. And they asked me to run a vaccine safety commission, to chair it and put together, esteemed, respected scientists from all over the world to look at the testing protocols for vaccines, to make recommendations about how to improve them. And this made huge headlines when it was announced. And Pfizer immediately gave President Trump $1 million. And President Trump then appointed two Pfizer nominees, Alex Azar, who came out of Eli Lilly to run HHS, and then Scott Gottlieb, who is Pfizer's business partner, to run the FDA. And Scott Gottlieb did a $100 billion favor for Pfizer with the vaccine, and then left FDA to go back to work for Pfizer and collect his payoff. And at the same time, so I don't know whether it was the $1 million from Pfizer. And those are the two guys who shut down the commission. Bill Gates, there's a tape out there where Bill Gates is bragging that he got Trump to disavow me. So, I can't look into his head and I can't look into Trump's head, so I can't tell you exactly what happened.
You're not a mind
with a
reader?
couple minutes before we go to audience super chats, I just the obvious one. My understanding is that you have said that
You can use the restroom, right?
Oh, yeah.
I can.
Yeah.
Of course.
So I can step away for a
Just
second.
come back as soon as you're good, and we'll start reading super chats while you're running. It's a lot harder here at the LP National because there's no immediate bathroom. Like we have.
It's a little
but we'll do this. We'll grab some of the super chats, and I'll save some of the bigger questions. I was literally going to ask him if the CIA killed his uncle, but we'll
save that one. Save it.
Well,
I have the CIA question loaded up. I have MK Ultra. I have all that loaded up. I'm ready to go. And then there's so many other questions with Epstein as well that I want to ask.
I love how polarizing the chats can be.
Yeah, the chat's going off. They love and hate. They're hot and cold.
Yeah, but
I
I tremendously respect his position so far. He's crossed his arms and pushed back and stood for what he wanted to stand for. And I respect when he said, "I don't know enough about the NFA. I can't answer." I'm like, well, I don't know how you expect someone to answer if they don't know what it is.
Yeah, he's taken the conversations. He's having a tough conversation, but at least he's having it, and we appreciate it. Very much for him doing that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of politicians come on this show. And only a handful, I can say, have seemed real.
Yeah.
I certainly think it's fair to say that there's a few questions where he's going to be a little bit more political. That I think that's reasonable to assess when you're hearing his answers. But I do respect when he points to things as it doesn't matter. I don't care about this. I think he's got a great point on Indigenous People Day is one of the least important things in terms of what's going on in this country. But to be fair, that's why I waited an hour and 15 minutes before I brought it up. Come on.
I loved all his stuff about environmental toxins. I loved the comments about SSRIs. You do see that a lot with
that's
mass
a major
shooters. And
issue.
I think it would be interesting. I mean, when he comes back to this room, if he weren't to win this election, if he would take a position in the cabinet as the head of the Health and Human Services Department. Because there are so many conversations that he's bringing up that I think are important. You guys all probably know the questions I want to ask him. We haven't gotten there yet.
Get in there.
But,
we don't take it easy on politicians, and there's still the reparations question. I need to ask the Epstein question. Like that needs to happen.
The reparations question we have to have, and the CIA one, I think is a little bit more silly.
Like maybe we could go longer and take super chats afterwards after talking to him.
I think what we should do is
he has a schedule till 10.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think for the super chats,
he could go at 10 when he's supposed to go. Maybe we could take super chats without him. Yeah.
Or a lot of super chats are for him.
Yeah.
So what I'll try and do is I'll try and grab a couple. Kyle has the question on asking about reparations, so I think that's the first one we should ask. So Kyle asked about the reparation plan for black farmers and whether a DNA test will be needed to prove the lineage or based only on skin color. So let's do that one. We absolutely the CIA one is kind of like that's the big one, but he has talked about it before. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear his response. I think he, of all people, needs Secret Service protection. Yeah. They will not give it to him. So anyway, but what you wanted to ask about Epstein?
Epstein, absolutely. Well, he flew on Epstein's plane twice.
Oh, that's right. Didn't he talk about it?
He did. I want to talk to him about that. Yep.
Oh man,
I know there's so many issues that I want to go at.
How many? Do you think it's possible that there were people who didn't realize what they were flying on?
We could ask him that question. We'll see what he says because that's such an issue.
Well, if there's any, do you think people didn't realize what they were flying on?
You look at what Cindy McCain said, and I'll bring it up.
What do you think?
I think they absolutely knew, and because it was very obvious.
So
you look at
what he was
you look at the
on?
victim's testimony; they were describing him being absolutely brutal and awful to children and to himself, and to specifically Epstein. He was absolutely a man who didn't hide what he was doing.
So anyone who flew on it would be aware, in your opinion.
Absolutely, like there's stories of him literally like taking off his pants mid-flight and then needing to do stuff every 2 hours. There's crazy stuff.
I want to stress this too.
But if there's any super chats for us, we should get them now.
They're mostly just for him. There's some that are
Guys, you don't want to talk to us tonight?
People.
Rude.
No, there's a lot of howdy people.
I'm just teasing.
But the other thing too is everyone always asks him about COVID, lockdown policy, big farm, and all that stuff. And I feel kind of like we should take the opportunity to ask about literally whatever we can that people are missing. So Epstein's big.
CIA's big.
He's back.
Reparations.
Joining us.
Yeah.
So we've got some questions for you that I think are pretty good. One of our users asked about your reparation plan for black farmers, and Kyle wonders, will there be a DNA test needed to prove lineage, or will it be based on skin color? And I think that was recent. The news came out about your reparation plan.
Yeah, that was, again, kind of the mainstream media distorting something that I said. What I said is that there's a certain program in the USDA which is supposed to be available to small farmers. So it's small farmer loans and grants. And as it turns out, the guy who was running that program for about 40 years was systematically not giving farmers in that program the grants that they were entitled to. So he would give it to white farmer, neighbor, but not the black farmer. And he just happened to be like a racist who was running the program, and he unfortunately ran it for many, many years. So ultimately, the Black Farmers Association brought that case to court, and they won. And they won a settlement that was the amount of money that would have been given to them if they were white, but was not. So, and then Congress wouldn't appropriate the money to make the payment. So that's the issue. It's not race based in terms of, it's money that was stolen from them, and it's getting that money to them that the courts have already awarded them.
Luke, you wanted to ask about the CIA or Epstein?
Well, there's a lot of things. The two kind of connect because the intel agencies.
Well, we'll start with one.
Yeah.
Make it easy.
The intel agencies were extensively running an extortion operation on a lot of high-profile politicians through Jeffrey Epstein. You talked about flying on his airplane before. Is there anything else you could tell us? Since there's individuals like Cindy McCain that have come out and talked about how everyone knew what he was doing. He was hiding in plain sight. That people were afraid of him. Is there anything else you could tell us, as there's some speculation about some people saying that you might be getting extorted potentially yourself?
No, I mean, I've been very open and frank about my experience with Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was a figure in New York. My wife had a relationship with my wife who took her own life in 2014, had a relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, I think, through my wife's old fiance, who had been a Greek who had been raised in Britain. And on one occasion in 1993, either she asked or Glenn offered her a ride. My wife wanted to go down to visit my mother on Christmas with our kids. And and she said that Glenn had offered her a ride on the plane because they went down there from New York to Palm Beach every weekend. So I wrote on that. We were on there. I was on there with my wife and my children, 2 children. I think Mary was pregnant at the time. And then I took a second plane ride, I think a year later. We went to South Dakota for the day to do fossil hunting, and this was 13 years before anybody knew anything about Jeffrey Epstein. To me, I didn't know anything about him at that time. I had a conversation on that airplane that made me think that, and I saw him do something on that airplane ride to South Dakota that made me think that he was a very bad person.
What did you see?
See, this is what we were just talking about this when you were in the bathroom. There's a lot of accounts of people saying he did really awful stuff.
Well, why don't we hear what he said?
I know. I'm leading up to it.
Well, I mean, it's kind of gossipy, but I was asking him how he made his money, and he told me, because he said that he had been a math teacher at Dalton, which was a school I knew about in New York. I don't know much about it, but I know it's a school for wealthy
Bill
kids.
Barr's father put him in there.
Right, come on.
Yeah, so he told me a story that seemed to me not credible. He said he was, and I said, okay, because I knew he owned a city block in New York, and that he was, to me, the only thing I really knew about him was he was the money manager for Les Wexler, right, who owns the Limited. And that's all I knew about him at the time. And of course, he's a big shot at New York. He goes to the Robin Hood dinner, which is, they raised $40 million in a night, and he was one of the big donors there. So people knew him. If you went out, you could see him, Anyway, I asked him, how did you, go from being a math teacher at Dalton to, having all this money. And he said that he'd been approached by some Chinese businessmen and that they had been ripped off by a con artist in the United States. And they asked him to find the con artist. And he succeeded in doing that, and that led to other opportunities. That's what he told me.
Wow.
And that made me think that he was lying.
Yeah, of course.
So, and then I asked him about a stock. And this is the first time I've ever met him. And he said, I never invest in stocks unless I have inside information. So I'm an attorney. I was a district attorney. And he says this to me. And, so it's a weird thing.
Yeah.
Do you think he felt untouchable?
What?
Like he said that to you knowing that you were a district attorney. He's like,
I wasn't at that time, but, it's an odd thing to tell me.
yeah.
A stranger who, you don't know. That
Unless you're really confident you don't get in trouble, right?
Were there any young
I don't
children
know.
there?
Then, no, I never. My kids were there, but on all my flights, the 4 flights, which are back and forth from Palm Beach and back and forth from Rapid City, my kids were on board on all of them. But then we touched down in. We were supposed to go from Rapid City to New York City. And instead, the plane landed in Chicago, which was unannounced, and he never told us he was landing in Chicago. And he said, when we landed in Chicago, and I'm looking out and saying, this is not New York, and I didn't recognize it because it wasn't O'Hare. It was the other little airport.
Midway.
Yeah, Midway.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But he's landing in a private jet. And I think there's private jets. That's where they go in.
There's a few smaller regional ones. Midway's.
It may have been those.
Yeah.
I don't know where it was, but it wasn't O'Hare.
Was it
Chicago?
Was it surrounded by gray walls?
I don't remember. This was this would have been 1993. So that's 31 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, I have very little memory. I do remember what happened, which is he said, "Oh, I have to make a trip to Europe." And, unanticipated. And he gets off the plane, and there's a beautiful, very, I would describe her as a hot blonde with a lot of kind of biological exuberance, let me put it that way, who was waiting on the tarmac next to a white Mercedes. And he goes down the stair and gets into the Mercedes, and then he went over to, he drove over to another private jet, and got on there. And Glenn said nothing, but she was just sitting there crying.
Whoa.
So, I just thought this is a very bad guy.
Did the plane didn't take you home then?
Yeah, and then we
back
took
home.
off and went home alone.
So him lying was the awful thing, or did he do anything else that was awful?
Well, I mean, he was this woman who we assumed was his girlfriend, and he was, treating her sort of, horrendously in front of us, and that seemed to me very, very cruelly, coldly. So I thought from then on, I thought he's a bad guy.
We were honored to have Dr. Ron Paul on our show last year. He said the CIA killed your uncle. Do you think so?
Yeah.
Why?
Why do I think that?
No. Like, why did they? Why would? I mean, I think.
I mean, it's pretty well documented.
Yeah. I just mean to open up the conversation.
What I would say is, if you have, there's 100 books about my uncle's assassination. The best book, which is an extraordinary distillation of probably 1 million pages of documents, and also the many confessions of people who were involved in the murder. I mean, the CIA is still blocking the release of documents, not only in the murder but in the cover-up. But the best book is a book called The Unspeakable by James Douglas, and it's a riveting book, but it's also he's a scholar, and it's an extraordinarily well-documented history. And are you asking why they killed him?
Yeah.
The group that killed him was a group from the Miami station, and they were angry at him, beginning with his failure to overthrow Castro. and they were angry with him because he was pulling out of Vietnam. He had signed an executive order bringing all troops home from Vietnam by beginning of '65.
This was related to Operation Northwoods?
No, Operation Northwoods was another thing that, this is all part of his battle with his military-industrial complex. But after the Bay of Pigs, he fired the head of the CIA, Alan Dulles. But Alan Dulles did not stop being involved with the governance of the agency after that. And then when my uncle was killed, Alan Dulles got himself put on the Warren Commission. And in fact, he was running the Warren Commission and steered all the Warren Commission investigation away from the CIA. And then either way, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is when Congress investigated, the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigated my uncle's death 10 years later. They said, yeah, it was a conspiracy. And most of the people, all but the senior counsel at that time, Bob Blakey, all the junior counsels believed that it was the CIA, and particularly this group, E. Howard Hunt, David Atlee Phillips, Bill Harvey, who ran the Miami station, and David Morales, and then operating with mobsters were Sam Giancana, who were from the Chicago outfit, Santos Traficante, who ran the Tampa and family, and then Carlos Marcello, who ran Dallas and New Orleans. And my father prosecuted all of them when my uncle was president. They all had casinos in Havana, and they were working hand in hand with the CIA on the assassination of Castro. So they were people who were, they were partners with the CIA in trying to murder Castro. And part of this, the program is called Alpha 66.
Was that in any way related to the story of the film Casino? You're familiar? Where the crooked mobsters in Chicago?
A lot of the mobsters, the mobster who was the liaison between between the CIA and Bill Harvey was the guy who was directing this program, and the mob who got the three families involved. His name was Johnny Roselli. And when he was subpoenaed by the committee, by the House Select Assassination Committee, he was subpoenaed once he testified, but then they brought summons him back to testify. And he was murdered on his way to testify, and he was cut up into small pieces and then put in a 55-gallon oil drum and was found floating 2 days later in Biscayne Bay in Miami. And at the same time, Sam Giancana, who was the head of the very, very powerful mobster who my father had prosecuted, and who I actually sat in a hearing room when I was 5 years old, and watched him take the fifth, I think 127 times, when my father was interrogating about a month before my uncle became president. My father was ridiculing him and saying, "You're laughing like a little girl, you're giggling like a little girl." So they hated each other.
Wow.
And Giancana, who was, also involved in the assassination, he was also subpoenaed by the committee, and he was murdered just before he was supposed to appear. He was executed in his basement.
But the good news is that the CIA has since been reformed, and these bad actors.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were held accountable for.
You can trust the government now.
Iran-Contra, MK Ultra. They take over the mainstream media. They take over social media. The Russian collusion hoax. It's not like they all organized it and orchestrated it. But my question is, if the CIA assassinated and took out a sitting U.S. president many, many years ago, what are they doing now? Since it looks like their power is only increasing with their influence over social media.
And the worrying thing is, with AI, that the power that will give them to, to really just to bend reality and to, and to control our perceptions and to activate our neuronal paths, these kind of, in the reptilian core of our brain, to light up these neuronal passages pathways that control human behavior. And I think it's really important that we have we begin fortifying our constitutional rights right now, and that we go back to the Smith-Mundt Act, and that we go back.
Yes.
We get the
Church Commission.
Was it the propaganda
The
bill?
Smith-Mundt Act, in the NDAA of 2012, I think it was that made it legal for the federal government to propagandize the American people.
And it's in the CIA charter too. But
I'm so happy you mentioned that.
Obama-
I harp on that a lot. So
I asked
Obama threw those out.
Yeah.
I asked our good friend ChatGPT, did the CIA infiltrate U.S. news media? It said yes, they did. Mockingbird, and then I said, are they still doing it? And said it's unclear, possibly.
Well, it was the Church Commission hearings that
there's
information came out, not Mockingbird.
No, Mockingbird was the name of it, wasn't it?
Operation Mockingbird was the name, and in fact,
And Church Commission revealed it.
Yes.
There's a 1973 article by Carl Bernstein, ironically, because he was one of the two Watergate journalists, Bob Woodward, who was himself a national security, plant. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein wrote an article in Rolling Stone in 1973 that disclosed that 400 of the leading journalists in our country and the leading editors in our country, including the New York Times and Washington Post, all the television networks were all CIA assets. And then the CIA then said, okay, we will stop. But they continue to be the biggest funder in the world of journalism. So they spend $10 billion a year, which they funnel through USAID, to fund journalism. They own some of the biggest magazines in the developing world, in Europe, et cetera, and newspapers and television stations, et cetera. But they said, we're going to stop Operation Mockingbird in the United States. We're going to stop propagandizing and spying and censoring. But then in 2014, the Obama passed an executive order, or issued an executive order, that allowed it to start again. And so there's some very interesting articles recently by CIA historians, Dick Russell, who wrote one for The Defender, about the infiltration of the CIA control of certain U.S. journals, including Daily Beast, Rolling Stone.
Oh, yeah.
The guy who runs Rolling Stone, Noah Schlachman, comes out of the national security community. Salon, Slate, Daily Kos, I think, the National Geographic, Scientific American.
Those are all liberal outlets.
Yeah, and then there's another the CIA historian who wrote the best biography of Allen Dulles. It's called The Devil's Chessboard. He wrote a book about the assassinations as well, about CIA involvement in the assassinations, called Brothers. He's an historian named David Talbot. He was the founder of Salon, actually. And he's written some really good articles about the CIA control of, a whole another group of journals. So it's, I think Operation Mockingbird is up and running.
Yeah, well, the psyops that they're doing now make MK Ultra look like child's play.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to ask you, is there any way that people outside of politics could not fall for these psyops? Is there, from your experience, any way to kind of resist against this larger kind of takeover of society?
I would say the way to do it is to elect me president, because I will dismantle this
It's a
system.
simple
I don't think
solution.
anybody else has the capacity to do it.
How many people are you going to fire on day one?
I'm not, what I'm going to do, there's certain people who need to be fired, particularly in the public health agencies at EPA and others, who I know because I've litigated against all those agencies, and I know who is very, very corrupt there. I know their names, and, the people that need to be moved. When I sued Monsanto, we found discovery documents that showed that the head of the pesticide division for a decade was a guy called Jess Rowland, was secretly working for Monsanto all the time and concealing and twisting all the science and bringing in these mercenary scientists from the pharmaceutical industry. We call them biostitutes, to do the studies. And there are people like that in all of the agencies, but it's not just firing people. It's getting rid of the perverse incentives
Absolutely.
That put agency capture on the steroids. 50% of FDA's budget comes from pharma. NIH is allowed under the Bayh-Dole Act to collect. NIH scientists collect $150,000 a year on products that they regulate. And NIH itself, NIH owned the Moderna vaccine, getting billions of dollars in profits. And there are 6 guys at NIH, the top dogs, who get $150,000 a year forever because they worked on that vaccine. And these are the guys that you want looking for problems in the product. You don't want them, you don't want them being incentivized to overlook stuff, which is what they did.
Are there any agencies that you think should be abolished completely?
Abolished completely?
There are memes such as, Thomas Massey routinely files a bill to abolish the Department of Education. People say abolish the ATF. The left says more abolish the police. So
he just did one with ending the U.S. Federal Reserve, and it's pretty clear. The Federal Reserve is printing us into poverty. They're the ones that giving BlackRock and State Street all the money, and the Fed. Yes or no?
Infinite money.
Infinite money.
It's insane.
ATF or the Fed or both. Would you get rid of them?
No. I would. The Fed. I would. Listen. The Fed.
You would get rid of the
Fed is the center of all problems, including all the war machine. Without fiat currency, we couldn't drive the war machine, and it functions to funnel money to Wall Street away from the American middle class. It functions to destroy local controls, local economies, Main Street, small businesses, and to financialize our economy and to send all of our industry abroad. So it needs to, fundamental reforms. My uncle saw that. That's why my uncle launched the silver certificate, the gold certificate. He understood what what it was doing was corrupt, and that he was trying to figure out a way to get us at least a little bit back toward base currencies.
If elected, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to ask a question about immigration. If elected, would you end birthright citizenship?
Birthright citizenship? I don't know. I would have to look at that. I think isn't there a constitutional provision that said if you're born in this country that you're a citizen? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, we read it, the 14th Amendment. All persons born in the United States. But the argument is that it says...
So you're talking about amending the U.S. Constitution?
Yeah, I think birthright citizenship incentivizes illegal immigration.
Well, wait, real quick.
I would shut down the border. Let me put it that way.
There you go. The argument is that the 14th Amendment says if you're...
I'll tell you exactly how.
The amendment says if you're born here and subject to our jurisdiction, you're a citizen. Some have argued you're here. Others have argued no, you're a foreign national. But I digress. Yeah, what's your border plan?
I'm going to do a couple of things. One is to actually shut down the border. You need infrastructure policy and personnel. The infrastructure is we need to complete the 27 gaps in the wall that, in the urban area. You don't need to build a wall all the way from 2,200 miles from Brownsville, Texas to
from sea to shining
San
sea.
Diego. In the urban areas where where illegal immigrants can quickly disappear, you need a big physical barrier. And I've been down there multiple times. And we need to fill those gaps. We need in the more urban, rural areas. You need to make sure that you need to complete the fencing. We need to have the long distance cameras, the night lights, the sensory devices that President Biden removed. And there's a few miles of access roads that need to be completed. In policy, we need to reinstate the Migrant Protection Act, which requires that people, migrants who are coming in from other countries and have an asylum claim that they adjudicate those while they're still in Mexico before coming to the United States, and change the catch and release program back to catch and return program. We need personnel. The Border Patrol roster, because of demoralization, because of all the unfair criticism they've been getting, is now at bare minimal levels. We need to revive that, and we need to send probably 300 asylum court judges to the border. I have another program that I think will be even more effective, which is I'm going to order the State Department and the Post Office to provide passport cards to every American who can't afford them. And that means that you'll be able to walk down to any post office with proof of citizenship, and you're going to be able to have a federally issued photo ID. is going to do three things. One is the big dispute between Democrats and Republicans about showing voter ID at the voting booth. The reason Democrats don't like that is because there are a lot of people in this country, millions, tens of millions, who don't have driver's licenses. And they're almost all Democrats. So they're elderly people whose license expired. They're urban minorities who don't drive, and they're students who don't have their license yet. Growing numbers of students don't have their license. And for a lot of those people, going to DMV is just torture. They're not going to do it. And so they don't have IDs. They're never going to get IDs. And if you require that they have an ID to vote, it means they've disenfranchised 10 million Democratic voters. That's why they fight so hard. We've got Reverend Al Sharpton, Andrew Young, a bunch of other civil rights leaders who agree that if I issue photo IDs to every American, that they will withdraw their objections to requiring photo ID at voting booths. We eliminate this big source of tension. It does a couple of other things. One is, let me just finish. One is that if you don't have a photo ID in this country, you're a second-class citizen. You cannot open a bank account. You cannot check into a hotel. You can't see your child at school. You can't get on an airplane. And so it makes being poor even worse. It takes care of that issue. And then finally, it's illegal already in this country for an employer to hire an illegal, undocumented immigrant. But they all do it because all you need to do is check a box that says, I saw their Social Security card. The Social Security card doesn't have a picture on it. They're easy to fabricate. They're passed hand-to-hand at work sites in New York. Oh, I'm going to make it that everybody, to get a job, you need to show a federally issued photo ID. If you can't do that, and the employer hires you, he is going to go to jail. And that will end the border overnight because nobody's coming in here. 99% of those people, when I only interviewed 300 people in one night. They all except for two said, I'm here for a job.
So you're saying everyone would need a federal ID, or is a state ID good as well? I mean, we have real ID.
You just need a government-issued photo ID. Okay. And it's not an ID where your medical records, your financial records, or anything else. It's just a photo ID from the post office. It's a passport card.
But so this would also, you're saying, so for voting, you would need a voter ID, but
you would need any kind of government-issued photo ID.
I like that. I do. Yeah. That's great. Then we get voter ID, and you make it easy to get IDs. That's fantastic. Yeah. Passport cards are great, by the way. I got one. Useful. Yeah, federal ID. I suppose we are just about at time. And I really do appreciate you coming and hanging out with us.
Well, I enjoyed talking with you guys.
I tremendous respect. I'll give you my honest take. I think you some of your answers are viewed a little politically, but I think a lot of it is. I think your answers are respectable. I think when you're asked about questions you didn't know, you simply said, "I just don't know," and that means a lot. My last question for you will probably just make everyone angry, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Have you ever heard the song "Kennedy" by Kill Hannah?
I don't know.
It's probably no one knows what it is. It's a Chicago band, and the song is literally him saying, "I want to be a Kennedy and live fast in cars," and basically describing your family. But I thought that was funny.
What they think is my family.
What they think is your family in the tabloids and all that. So, is there anything else you wanted to add as we wrap up? Anything you want to shout out?
I'm grateful to you, Tim, and Luke, and Phil, and Anna Claire.
Thank you for getting the whole name.
Thank you all very much.
Where can people find out more information about you and your campaign?
Kennedy24.com.
Yeah.
And, we're collecting signatures in most states right now. We just got on the Florida ballot today. So if people want to volunteer or help with the campaign, we'd love that.
One last serious question, though. I heard you say on an interview that you believe before the CNN debates, you will have enough states to qualify. You already have the polls.
Well, the weird thing about CNN is CNN made, I think, a big mistake, which is that it offered two criteria. One criteria was that you need to be on the ballot in sufficient states to get 270 electoral votes. Well, by that date, we will have enough signatures to get, by the June 20th date, which is the cutoff date, we will have enough signatures to get 343. So we will be able to qualify. guess who can't qualify?
Biden.
Biden or Trump, because they're not going to be on any ballots. They're the presumptive nominee. Their parties own the ballot slots, but they don't own them yet.
This is why Biden's not on in Ohio. It's just he's not going to be on the ballot.
He's not going to be on.
That's crazy.
I don't know. I think I can't believe they're not going to fix it.
DeWine said everyone has to come in on Tuesday and fix this. So we'll see what happens.
All right. Thanks for hanging out. You guys want to shout anything out before we go?
Yeah, thank you so much for having the conversation. It was, we agreed on some things, we disagreed on some things, but we at least had the conversation. We thank you so much for coming in here and taking our questions. Really appreciate it. I thought the conversation was fascinating. If you want to support me, and if you like the shirt that I'm wearing that says "Trust God, Not Government," get it on thebestpoliticalshirts.com. And we're raising money for our new studio called Seamus's New Liver on SaveIrishman.com. SaveIrishman.com. Check it out.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Kennedy. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil. Good to meet you guys.
I am Phil That Remains on Twix. I'm Phil That Remains Official on Instagram. The band is All That Remain. You can catch us on tour this summer with Megadeth and Mudvayne on the Destroy All Enemies tour starting, August 2nd, going through September 28th. You can check out our new single, Divine, on Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, Amazon Music, and Dozer, whatever. Doozer. Yeah, that's what it is. I mess it up all the time.
The internet.
The internet. Anyways, and the left lane's for crime. See you guys later. Hannah Claire.
What a cool job. This is a very fun show. I'm Hannah Claire Brimlow. I'm a writer for SCNR.com. That's Scanner News. Follow all of their work at Timcast News on Instagram and Twitter. I'm really appreciative that you came out tonight. It's so fun to have you here. If you want to follow me personally, I'm on Instagram at Hannah Claire B, and I'm on Twitter Instagram at HannahClaire.B, and I'm on Twitter at Hannah Claire B. Thank you guys for everything you do for us. Bye, Tim.
We are back Monday with a special pre-recorded episode because we're here at the LP National and it's Memorial Day, so everyone's off, but we're going to have an episode for you guys. Thank you all so much for being members at timcast.com. Go there, click join us, subscribe to support the show, and we will see you all next time.